Good evening, both you all in the dining room from where I am and you all at home. My name is Sonja Curry-Johnson, and I'm pleased to host a Virginia Center for the Creative Arts Fireplace series, the hybrid edition. Okay. We have here two wonderful women. We have Shaun Spencer-Hester, who is the executive director of the Ann Spencer House, Garden and Gardens Museum, and also a direct descendant of Ann Spencer. Ann Spencer is a Harlem Renaissance poet and a civil rights activist who lived in Lynchburg, Virginia. And Shaun is a direct descendant of Miss Spencer. And she's going to talk to you about Miss Spencer as we wait to welcome our Ann Spencer Fellowship recipient, Marisa Williamson. So, Shaun, welcome.
Thank you, Sonja.
Can you tell us a little bit about Ann Spencer and the museum? Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. And a little bit about Ann Spencer. She was Annie Bethel Scales, Bannister. She was educated as a homeschool and was sent to Virginia Seminary Theological College in 1896. She was the youngest to be enrolled at the seminary at age 11. Yet she graduated valedictorian of her class in 1899. Her future husband, Edward, my grandfather, sang a solo. They married in 1901 and live in Lynchburg, Virginia. Their home became the Mecca, inviting some of the leading voices, politics, and poetry. Ann Spencer, it was included in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry in 1974. She lived to see that before she died in 1975. Her home in Virginia is listed as a Virginia Historic Landmark and on the National Register of Historic Places. It is open to the public by appointment only. During COVID, we will not open the House Museum until spring of 2022. Yet the garden is open to the public free of charge. It's open 7 days a week, sunrise to sunset. It is the only known restored garden of an African American in the United States. The important word is restored garden. We certainly know that there were other African Americans gardening, but we need to find more about that. But Ann Spencer was an avid gardener as well as a writer, poet, civil rights activist, and many of these other things. But about the Ann Spencer Fellowship, this fellowship was established in 2017 in honor of Ann Spencer, the Harlem Renaissance poet and civil rights activist. It is funded by Elizabeth Logan Harris, Frankie Harris Slaughter, and Lyle Forsyth Harris. The Ann Spencer Fellowship provides a 1-month residency of $1,500, honorarium to writers, visual artists, and composers of African American descent. The VCCA Residency at Mount St. Angelo includes a private studio and 3 meals a day in the community of cross-disciplinary artists. The Ann Spencer Fellows, they also tour the Ann Spencer House and Garden Museum, and we're looking forward to hosting Marisa there. And we also participate in what we're doing tonight in a community presentation, which is coordinated with the Ann Spencer Memorial Foundation Incorporated. So I'd like to welcome and congratulate Marisa Williams as the 2021 Ann Spencer Fellow.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Would you indulge me, Marisa, by just reading a little bit about you?
Read a little bit about me?
Marisa, yes.
Marisa, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Marisa Williamson is a project-based artist who works in video, image making, installation, and performance around the themes of history, race, feminism, and technology. She has produced site-specific works at Monticello and by commission from the Storm King Arts Center, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Monument Lab, and the National Park Service. She has had solo exhibitions at the University of Virginia, the University of Washington, and spaces in Cleveland. Her work has been exhibited in venues nationally and internationally, including Real Artways Hartford, the Print Center, Philadelphia, Newer Berliner Kunstverein, Berlin, Brick, Brooklyn, Human Resources in Los Angeles, and the Stefania Missetti Gallery in Rome. Williamson has received grants from the Rima Hort Mann Foundation, the Schlesinger Library and the History of Women in America, and the Graham Foundation. She attended the Whitney ISP from 2014 to 2015. She holds a BA from Harvard University and an MFA from Cal Arts. She lives and works in New Jersey, and in 2021 will join the faculty of the McIntyre Department of Art at the University of Virginia as an assistant professor of media arts. And I've enjoyed being a fellow along with her these few weeks. So, Marisa, if you would take it away for us.
Yeah, I'm sorry to the audience here for having to look away from you, but I don't think my cord is going to stretch that far. But yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here. I want to thank the Ann Spencer Memorial Foundation for giving me this fellowship, and I've really enjoyed my time here. Today, I wanted to present a kind of family of work. I often have lots of projects going on at the same time, so I had to decide what to share. But this is just one kind of lineage of projects that one has begotten the other. So I've titled this talk On Unsettling Grounds, which I hope will kind of reveal itself over time. But it all began in 2013. I was really interested in, how I was sensing the past coming to life in the present, even in spaces. I was at grad school in Los Angeles and felt I was as far as I could be from, the colonial South, but still felt as though something was haunting the spaces. Something was permeating, the boundaries of that space, something about the past. And so I proposed a project where I would go to Monticello and perform as Sally Hemings, who I'd been reading about at the time, and try to figure out what it would mean to use performance to kind of conjure a ghost in that space and see if I could unsettle, people's experiences of touring what is a historic house museum that more or less glorifies Thomas Jefferson and leaves the enslaved population at the time primarily in the margins. I was interested in kind of like counter surveillance and what it would mean to have a ghost or a figure, look back at a space and do a kind of reverse surveilling of an otherwise surveillant force. I was also interested and continue to be really interested in graveyards. And I thought this sign that Monticello is a kind of African-American graveyard seemed like the most accurate sign on the plantation in my visit there. And I had decided to do this performance. It started with, I was reading this book, Kindred by Octavia Butler, which I recommend people read, where a kind of contemporary woman gets pulled into the past and realizes she has to save a historical, one of her ancestors who turns out to be a white ancestor while the woman is African-American. And in reading that book, I was trying to figure out like, oh, can I adapt it? What should I do? Should I try to like make, a picture of the book or something? And my advisor was like, why don't you just do the book or like perform the book. So among my things I did at Monticello, I sang karaoke. I'm really into how song, even contemporary music, can somehow disrupt and as a kind of anomaly or anachronism can kind of tip people off to something being not quite right on the site. And there are a lot of ways things can be not quite right on the site. And in this case, it's me and this ghost, but it's also, slavery and all of the kind of triggering ideas and terms and experiences that come out of this site. I ate chicken and I went for a run and read and cried, and also kind of served as one of few people there kind of guiding people. People were like, where's the bathroom? Or like, how do we find the next tour? So I was really interested in how making an outfit, and again, it started with trying to figure out what uniform this person would wear, sewing this outfit by hand, but trying to figure out how to be a tour guide in an unconventional way, on a site that didn't have, at the time, people dressed up as tour guides. And that work led to, and Sally Hemings, I don't know if people know this, she's Thomas Jefferson's, the mother of 4 of his children, and she's a person who was enslaved at Monticello. Her life is very interesting. I would certainly just read up on her, and then you'll know more about her. The work led to giving other tours. Up on the left is a tour at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I got even more interested in how Sally Hemings, in relation to other objects, could put those objects in context for people. So in that tour, I took people through this Alexandria ballroom, which is a space snatched up from Alexandria, reinstalled in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a space where George Washington had birthday parties, where when he was friends with Jefferson, Jefferson would likely have brought a coterie of people to care for him while he celebrated and fested in Alexandria, Virginia. And then at the bottom is this tour I gave from the back of the bus at Storm King Art Center, which is a kind of monumental sculpture park in upstate New York. And yeah, I think of this work as being part of kind of institutional critique, in the vein of Andrea Fraser and Fred Wilson, but again, was really interested in how a body like Sally Hemings, a body like mine, might do quite a bit in interrogating the objectification of people, possession, and of course, a certain type of labor, like an affective labor. I think I would say that Sally Hemings was like an emotional laborer and an affective laborer. And I'm just trying to figure out how to make that kind of work visible to people, as opposed to the type of work that is frequently being foregrounded at plantations, like people who are processing the land and processing materials. And again, the work is really about this idea of trying to unsettle something. So unsettling as in haunting, unsettling as in, continuing to keep something moving, unsettling as far as agitating. And this project was fun. This was in 2017, and then in 2018, I was invited to University of Virginia to be an artist in residence, which felt like a pretty wonderful homecoming. And at that time, after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, I was really interested in whiteness and whiteness as a surface, whiteness as a condition that seemed to have riled a lot of people up. And so there I was making at first I was like just taking some pictures and getting some students to help me take pictures in this costume I'd put together of the ghost of Thomas Jefferson. But then ultimately I turned the images into a postcard book, which continues to be a kind of form that I like because it can tell a story. It seems like a report from the front of somewhere, like greetings from the University of Virginia. And you can also, as postcards always are, they're kind of a fiction. They're kind of like a perfect snapshot of the location. And so this postcard book, I gave away the last one that I brought with me here. But if you write to me, I can send you a postcard book. Traces, you can't really see it here, but traces a day on campus of the ghost of Thomas Jefferson, which for anyone who's been to UVA, he feels like he's just like stalking every corner of the school. And people love him and yeah, people mostly seem to be into him there, but also increasingly more ambivalent about his legacy. So I was really interested in what it means to kind of inhabit this person, this kind of historical drag, to try to figure out what, there are things that were very uncomfortable about inhabiting Sally Hemings, but there were things that were also uncomfortable about inhabiting Thomas Jefferson's ghost. but it allowed me to do this performance at the end where the ghost of Thomas Jefferson makes a case for reparations at UVA. And that really, after visiting the Ann Spencer House in 2018, I got interested in like what kind of reparations, could be demanded of an institution. And the Ann Spencer House, I hope you can go see it in the garden. One of the things that Ann Spencer did was to create like creative space making, made a space for people to move through the region who couldn't find housing elsewhere in the 20th century. And so I was really interested in how the ghost of Thomas Jefferson, kind of on behalf of those he oppressed, could make the case for making a space in institutions like UVA and in Charlottesville for artists of color who have found it hard to find places to settle as they move through the country and across the states. I'll just jump over a bit. This is like a cousin of the project, but Sweet Chariot, as I said, it was difficult to perform as Hemings, and so I stopped. But one thing that got me to stop was this opportunity to create an augmented reality smartphone app that would bring together all sorts of voices along the journey to freedom, and would kind of use those many voices, those many performances to create a kind of chorus of people, a chorus of individuals demanding freedom. And that would like seemed a little bit more manageable than like making these demands on my own.
I'm Monument Lab artist Marisa Williamson. I'm here to present my prototype monument, Sweet Chariot. Sweet Chariot is a video scavenger hunt. Use the map and the app to unlock
take a map if you want
around the city of Philadelphia. Sweet Chariot explores the African-American historical struggle for freedom. The tour begins here in Washington Square West, which used to be Congo Square, a burial ground for Africans who had lost their motherland. Find the Washington Square West Monument Lab Research Laboratory. There, you can grab a map and download the app to begin your journey. Using this poster or the back of the map, unlock your first clue. It's nothing you found. I'm afraid I'm lost. There are a secret network of doorways you see, and once you go through one and then another, it's hard to find your way back. But I think you can help me. Throughout the city of Philadelphia, there are stories of the past, hidden in plain sight. Use the Sweet Chariot app to unlock 8 videos that tell these stories of the African-American struggle for freedom.
Okay, so it's a little easier to show you that in a video than it is to show you in person, but you can download the app on your phone and you can grab a map, you can go to Philadelphia, and you can watch these videos while walking around the city. You have to find images that are given to you on the map, and then you hold up your phone over the image and a video plays. So it was a chance to work with a lot of other artists. This was an artist from Newark who had made this mask, and I had her perform as the bird woman in Congo Square, kind of conjuring these ritual performances that would have happened, brought over from Africa on burial sites around, New England and the mid-Atlantic to help send people back to where they belonged in death. She's also kind of blocking the statue of George Washington. So I was really interested in how you could substitute performance for other monuments. This commemorates an orphanage that was burnt down during these race riots in Philadelphia in the at the kind of dawn of the Civil War, as people were being drafted and were upset, of course, at African Americans for having been the cause of this civil unrest. It was a chance to work with scholars who could put texts like artifacts into context on this journey through time, and ministers who could conjure the words of historical ministers and then bring those to life for people. And the whole journey is about trying to find this woman her way home through Philadelphia. So she's caught in time, kind of similar to Octavia Butler's character, and Amelia Brown, is trying to find her way back to her resting place, which ends up being Wekiko Playground, which had been the prompt for the whole project, which I engaged with along with Monument Lab. A prompt because the playground, it turned out, was a burial ground for Mother Bethel AME Church. And so I was trying to create a kind of mobile monument for that space. So quickly, this was the kind of final spot.
This is my home.
It's ruining it for
you.
In
1810, Mother Bethel minister Reverend Richard Allen bought this land as a final resting place for a homesick people, for orphans, mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons. But it was lost.
buried by forces within and beyond human control. One day, we will all be ancestors, fluffs of cosmos that float in and out of our loved ones' bodies. In dust, they kick up with their feet. Believe. Something in the wind, yes it does, knows me. I want to hang on a thread. Oh yes, I want to be on the edge. I want to be the kind of spook, oh yeah, that makes a cat leap up on the banister. Believe in me. There is a woman on the moon, sitting with rounded stones. There is a woman on Mars, weaving in red dust. There is a woman on Earth, moving words like cowries. The words become futures to be exhumed. All these women, these worlds, these words are me. Believe. Live without doom in your teeth. Open ground up and dance over dust. You must become the sweet chariot. Listen, learn, remember, and carry these stories home to others, the stories that make up the long journey to freedom through time.
So that's kind of teasing the end of the tour for you, but you should still do the tour. It's fun, but yeah, it takes you through historic Philadelphia. And that video is a collaboration with an animator who really, in many ways, inspired the project because she had proposed a monument for that site in the prior iteration of Monument Lab. So we worked together to draw that chalk on the ground over 2 nights, 2 days and 2 nights in the playground, looking like two crazy black ladies. And the poem is by my high school English teacher, Yolanda Wisher, who was the poet laureate of Philadelphia for a while. And what was really nice about the work, as I was departing from performing as Sally Hemings, was how much, doing this work collaboratively really reminds you what would have been important to people of the past, which is kind of family, community, singing in a chorus of voices. And that's really marked a huge shift, I think, in my practice away from performing by myself, trying to be, an angry Sally Hemings, bring justice to Monticello, and instead trying to figure out how the platform of Sally Hemings, how the work around Sally Hemings can be a way to uplift a lot of different people and a lot of different histories at the same time. So a monument I've been proposing for a while and been, creating in various iterations is the seed bed. It's like a bed with a garden inside of it. It's a monument to Sally Hemings. But most recently, I've been really interested in the seed bed being a kind of pedestal, similar to the pedestals we're seeing now left behind by removed Confederate monuments. But this pedestal would have these little nooks in it, and it would, instead of being granite or concrete, would look like a giant core sample from the earth. So something that's been, extracted from the ground underneath the monument, underneath the bed. And inside these nooks would be speculative monuments, things like speculative artifacts like books and dolls and things from the household that might represent other buried histories, queer histories, indigenous histories, other African-American histories that we might find buried in the ground if we can only look. So here's some iterations of seedbed that actually existed, but really in its final form, it's going to be what I hope it will be is a residency where artists can come to Charlottesville and come to Albemarle County and propose monuments for the county and work in small towns and figure out what histories are buried there. And then in some way, all of those get packed into another augmented reality app that people can use to explore Albemarle County, find these artworks, and kind of get a museum in the palm of their hand of different performance works that bring to life some of these really interesting stories that have only just begun to be uncovered and revealed to people. So in closing, I'm so over time, I'm going to read you this part of my application. If anyone, and if the writers want to help me with finishing this application or giving me feedback on it, I would love that. And this is just like a collage of video that, is background to that. Albemarle towns across the colonial horse cart highways and 19th century railway corridor were home to flour mills, plantations, river ports, early Scotch-Irish settlers, enclaves of Jewish immigrants, and civilly disobedient Presbyterians willing to educate the enslaved. Free persons of color and the recently emancipated populated historic African-American communities that have barely survived, while the whereabouts of their burial grounds often have not. Albemarle County was created in 1744. It occupies unceded Monacan land. Charlottesville is the county seat. Thomas Jefferson's plantation is there, and until the Civil War, enslaved African Americans outnumbered whites. Unsettling Grounds brings together voices from the margins of America and American history to amplify diverse perspectives and emphasize common refrains. Unsettling Grounds is a platform for showcasing experimental and monumental works by Black, Indigenous, and low-wealth artists. In partnership with Albemarle County, the project allows The Bridge to pilot place-based and project-driven residencies in Charlottesville for artists hailing from Central Virginia and beyond. Unsettling Grounds is an augmented reality scavenger hunt through the rural towns of Albemarle County. It's an interactive storytelling tool. Using the app and the map, audiences uncover hidden histories of lesser-known struggles for freedom. The project reveals and preserves legacies of resistance for which monuments are missing. You should think about supporting this project. You should think about whether you want to participate in this project. You should think about what you believe would be in the ground if things were uncovered. You should recommend other people for this project. I'm super psyched to have been able to have time here in Virginia to work on gathering people together for this project. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here on, as someone supported by a person who, in the last century saw this kind of work as valuable. I think Ann Spencer's vision is alive both in the House Museum, but also in this fellowship. So people on the internet should apply to this fellowship. And I hope people will continue to support this kind of work because, as I said, it's part of a family of works that include, your works yet made and works of others. So thank you. Let me see.
Oh, Marisa, thank you very much. That was enlightening. That was a whole bunch of words that, as a writer, I should be able to bring to mind, but I can't because I have goosebumps. That's what I have. That's what I have here. Thank you so much. I would love, or we would love for people from the audience, both audiences, both virtual and right there with us, to ask you some questions about this very compelling work.
I have a question.
Yeah, oh, we have a question here from Rodney. Yes.
I was actually wondering specifically about the tour as Sally Hemings and the kind of institutional critique that you're doing, and whether or not you thought that translated to the people on the tour, or what their experience of the tour was in terms of your performance.
Yeah, Rodney wants to know what I think people's experience of the Sally Hemings tours was, and whether the institutional critique translated to people. I think at the Met, it was good. It was a little tense. I mean, they're always a little bit tense. I don't think people know what they're doing why they came once they're there. And at the Met, there's a lot of material. I had done research about mahogany, which is a wood that people compare, poets compare it to the flesh of the people who harvested it. And it was harvested in ways that were so brutal that, the slave trade could barely keep up with the demand for workers in harvesting mahogany, and the spaces are full of mahogany. So I was really directing people's attention to things that were unpleasant. And it came out of being a teacher at the Brooklyn Museum and doing inquiry-based learning, where you're like, what do you see that makes you say that? And asking people to analyze an object and try to assume, certain, come up with some expectations of who used it and owned it and why and where it came from. So I think people were engaged because that is what I had been trained to do, is to try to engage people in a close looking. And I think people were probably like, well, what am I supposed to do about all of this? But I think the most generous visitor would be like, oh, I should really practice this close looking on my own and more often, and try to figure out whether the museum holds secrets, that it's not, having on its plaques. Storm King was a little bit harder. That one was pretty abstract because it's like these big sculptures, but it was really about ruin and what a place like Storm King would look like in the future after we are no longer here, and what resources went into carving out all of that land for the preservation of huge steel abstract sculptures, and how lots of weird histories can be traced through some of those big artists like Calder and de Souvreau's interests and practices and their times in which they exist. So that one was a little bit weirder, but I think people, they have some games, played some flashcard games on the bus. It was a lot. I think I want people to have some fun, and I want them also at the same time to leave with a little bit of just another way of looking at a museum. But I should give them surveys, I guess, but yeah. I don't know, though. I'd be curious to know what people think. I think they have fun.
I have a question.
There's a question from Alan Michael here. Yeah, go ahead.
So I love this work, first of all. Thank you. Butler sends her protagonist back, Dana, back to Hindley, right?
Yes, yes.
But then Dana, upon re-entry into her present, is disfigured.
Yes, she loses her. She loses her arm.
Her arm.
Just up here.
What I'm wondering is, and Butler says she's got an amazing interview with Randall Keenan where she talks about it and says that she couldn't have Dana come back from handling this material without paying for it.
Yeah,
personally.
yeah.
So I'm interested, how does this feel? What's the cost for you working with this material?
Yeah, the question is, what is the cost of working with the material by way of Octavia Butler's Dana losing her arm upon her return home? Yeah, the book there's a lot going on in the book. She has to facilitate the kind of sexual exploitation of her ancestor in order to ensure her own survival. So she's stuck making a terrible choice. Yeah, the cost to me, I didn't like people, I started the work looking for some answers around, how do two bodies that are kind of similar or occupy a similar body, Sally Hemings, she could have looked like me, or she could be she'd be a woman, she'd be categorized as African American. What do we have in common? And then I was drawing from my own life to kind of populate a script for her, and that was bizarre. And then I would field questions, that were just difficult, but really got me thinking. I guess they were the questions I invited, like, is there love? And life must have certainly been better for Sally Hemings than other people, so she must have been happy. What do you think? Do you think she'd be happy? She was lucky. She was a lucky slave. Don't you feel like you'd be lucky? And being her and getting those questions as a metonymic thing, like being the embodiment of her, was hard. But interesting, that's what I wanted. But yeah, the cost was that I got really into the work, and now that's what I'm known for. The cost of it is that I had to said things I don't always think I really meant. I mean, now I had to learn. I just learned so much making the work. I learned how different our lives are and that I'm being a little bit reckless when I put us together. But then I also learned about all the ways we still feel the same, like we're still moving through the same world. So yeah, I just realized it was hard to do alone, and that she's such an exceptional individual that she shouldn't really stand alone, even if she did historically kind of stand alone, that the experience of the enslaved is really one that needs to be told by lots of people together, and that as an individual, it's not really about me. I mean, I think a lot of us make work kind of like because we're into ourselves, and that was maybe a bit of it, like a way I had to wander in and out of, you know, find some distance from her eventually, because she's not really mine. So, and I could go on. Yeah, she's not mine, and I think I need to lay her to rest. I think she needs to, like, she has, I think Saidiya Hartman talks about the historical persona deserving obscurity, like they deserve to be unknown sometimes. And I think it's not my job anymore to make her any more known. And that was interesting to learn and taught me something about myself. Yeah. That was hard question. But thank you for it.
Do we have any more questions?
We have a question, yeah, from Felicia, yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. You mentioned that you love visiting cemeteries. When I visited the slave cemetery at Sweetbriar, there were only stones and they were very hard to find, and they're not engraved in any way. Did you find any cemeteries that were more informative?
What's a good, yeah. African-American cemeteries are for the enslaved are pretty rough. I went to the Sweetbriar one. I didn't see stones. I should look harder. I didn't go in. Just saw a sign that said plantation burial ground, which I thought was interesting because it's not everyone on the plantation. It's just the Black people. I was like, oh, I guess you mean Black people. You know, the one at Monticello's in the parking lot, that one's kind of interesting because it's just like a closed off space. I'm really interested in augmented reality there. Is there a good one? They're all good. People are, I think, again, maybe it's granting, I don't know. I think they should have augmented reality or signage or something, I think. But I'm also into like Monacan burial mounds. I mean, there is a practice of not leaving a very clear mark as to who this earth belongs to or whose body is under it. And so while unmarked cemeteries are, you know, there's a tragedy in them, I am interested in whether that's kind of us projecting back on a need to know people and know their names. And I'm trying to get a little more open to the idea that that's just one way to mark people's place in the world. And there are a lot of other ways to mark it. Mark that place, and maybe there's something else to be done rather than kind of make them look like obelisk-filled statuary spaces. But it is hard. At Sweetbriar, there's like Monument Hill where the founders are buried, and it's like really different, and that's hard to see. So I think that compels my work a lot. It's just the difference between burial grounds. Yeah, the question was about burial grounds.
Yeah. I wonder if we have any questions online, but while we're waiting to see if that happens, I did have one myself, and it might be more of speak on this sort of question of, as of late, there are some controversies about how history should be presented and what our perspectives should be and what they shouldn't be. And they're now, having this battleground out in our public schools. Do you see where you might have either some commentary or how maybe this current debate might engender some of your work going forward, or what are you thinking?
I think, a lot of how I got started, thinking about history was in school. I think school is exactly where you get your first sense of where you belong, and history classes are a big part of informing and letting people know where they belong in history. So it's very important to me. I think I don't know, things like service learning in history class, like getting out of the classroom and going to do some work in some way in some community, serving that community can be really helpful. I think students producing their own forms of knowledge, so creative projects that involve turning research into something tangible can be really interesting. I think, as I was mentioning the other day, I found this book from 1950 that was used in classrooms up until the 80s on Virginia history, and it really miscast and mischaracterized, from what we know now, the conditions and the relationship between enslaved people on the whole and the people who oppressed them. So I think the opportunity to like look at books not as comparative study is really important. So like looking at multiple books at the same time and trying to do that work, that hard work, is really important in school. And I think critical race theory is important. Looking at things from a frame that considers power dynamics and patterns. But yeah, I think parents should get involved. I think kids should get involved. I think people should be really trying to make history a living thing in schools rather than a fixed thing. I think it should be something that's always being reevaluated. It's a good fight, I think, to figure out what should be taught to kids. And people should go on field trips. People should take their kids where they want to go and have conversations as well outside of the classroom. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts. But I don't know. I think this project will certainly, my hope is that it will serve school groups and people can come and use the app and propose things, and that it becomes scalable and reproducible and a tool for teaching people and having conversations about history.
Yeah, I hope so.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. All right. Do we have here we are. Have one. It says, Marisa, talk about, if you would, the big signs in New York City if the people could fly.
What are you talking about? This is my mom.
Is it?
My mom. What does she want? If the people could. Oh, this image that I have up was a billboard. The image is the one that's, I don't think anyone can see it now, but it's the, is that what she's talking about? I don't know what she's talking about. Yeah, this image, I guess, as the opening slide was kind of inspired by this folk story, The People Could Fly. I don't know what her question is about. What's your question about, Mom? Can you rephrase that in the form of a question? My mom's a great supporter of my work. She is the biggest fan. She does deep dives. I don't always know where she's gone with her deep dives, but yeah, I mean, folk stories, music, folk music, spirituals really help me come up with titles and come up with narratives for the work. And this image that I guess you all can see a little bit came out of kind of the idea of liberation and freedom, but also this Octavia Butler cost of that freedom, this hand getting kind of broken up while trying to let go of the plantation house. So it was on a billboard in Midtown Manhattan. I don't know if anyone driving by knew what was going on, but it was cool to see that tribute to Octavia Butler, so big. And yeah, big is good. Things should be big.
Indeed, they should.
To her, I don't know. Okay.
Yes. What are you working on now, and how does it connect to your previous work, and also go in new directions?
Right now, I'm trying to make a baby doll, and I'm trying to use the baby doll here at the residency to create another like postcard book about like childhood on what would have been a plantation, I guess. And motherhood on what would have been a plantation, but through a kind of some sort of absurd or dreamlike series of images. But I have to finish the doll. I'm not quite sure how the doll should look. But it is great to be in the studio. You know, when I'm finished typing up the text for the application, it's really nice to be able to just make things and experiment with materials and figure out what the work is trying to do there. So, yeah, residencies are great. People should apply. The residency, it's inviting composers, and people should apply so they can hang out here. That's a great question. I'm also hiking through the trail, trying to cut things in the little hiking trail because it's a little overgrown, which has been interesting. It's beautiful here.
I must concur. It is beautiful.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah. And haunted. It's great. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. I don't see any more online questions. Online people. Oh. And Shaun is back with us. Hello.
Okay. Hey, I was just thinking, I was listening to Marisa talk about sewing this doll. And you know, when you look back and hear back of the other characters that you create, you seem to work in textiles and a little bit. Is that something did you have background, or is this something you kind of found as you were working?
My grandmother taught me to sew, and it was just it was like one of the first slow moving, you know, material, you know, lessons that it just really stuck. She was cool. She's from Louisa County, Culpeper, Catalpa. And so, yeah, I think her sewing and making clothes with me and for this doll that I had was really informed what I start with in the studio, which is making stuff for bodies and yeah, sewing things. Yeah.
I love that.
People should check out.
Yeah. Another layer.
Yeah. Quilts are important to me. I think of video like quilt making. Yeah, that's another talk. But yeah, there's a scholar, Lisa Woolfork, who she's at UVA, and she's started a sewing project. People should check her out. She's also into performance, and she sees a connection between the two.
That is great. That is great. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I definitely want to give. Oh, got another one. This is from Sue Howard. Can you talk a little bit more about recreating the persona of Sally Hemings and her impact on American history from behind the scenes? Thank you, Sue Howard.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly in closing. Yeah, Sally Hemings. Drawn to her because she's kind of unpopular. She's no Harriet Tubman. She's no, you know, freedom fighter. But I've really found her to be an interesting figure who, as you say, behind the scenes, one can imagine, you know, in the most generous reading of her, that she was someone who foresaw that, you know, her presence in the world might serve later on to be the kind of undoing or, you know, unraveling of a very particular legacy. So I like to think of Sally Hemings as someone who, though we don't know a lot about what went into her decision making, of course she had the opportunity to be free in France at the age of 16, but was pregnant at the time, we believe, with her first child. Her brother, of course, tried to get free in France, and he was granted his freedom in exchange for coming back to Monticello and teaching someone else to cook, but then he later took his own life. So I think the costs of these kinds of negotiations was certainly high for people. But Sally Hemings goes back to Monticello and remains there for the majority of her life, and probably was unhappy to some degree, for sure. But I'm really interested in how her love of family and commitment to freedom in this kind of unpopular route delivers to us a very particular model for resistance that isn't typical, but is a kind of resistance model that foregrounds like a long game or a kind of deep time mode of resistance, one that kind of disrupts the easy reading of historical figures that we generally put on a pedestal. So I don't know if that, yeah, that's Sally Hemings from behind the scenes. That's what I think of her.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Well, I would like to give Marisa and Shaun another hand and to thank them very much for spending the time with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, fellows. Thank you. And we'd like to conclude by saying that Virginia Center for the Creative Arts is a very special place, and this is where we as artists are fostered, are the writers, the sculptors, the composers, the filmmakers, the choreographers, you know, everybody apply, please. And those of you that can hear my voice and are listening out there in interwebs land, please, and also those of you who can support us, absolutely do that too. All right. Thank you again, and I think we're gonna leave you now.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.